Now, a question I get asked all of the time, from amateur all the way to professional photographers and filmmakers, is what lenses do I recommend, or what lens should I buy? And I've got to admit, it's quite a difficult question because there are so many lens options out there. So in today's video, I'm going to be ranking every single Canon RF lens that I have ever reviewed on this channel to show you guys what I recommend for weddings, landscapes, or even wildlife photography, as well as what lenses I prefer shooting with. And I'm going to start right now. So in this video, we're just going to be looking at Canon RF mirrorless lenses. We're not going to be looking at the older DSLR EF lenses or any other brand. We're just going to be looking at Canon RF mirrorless lenses. And what we're going to be doing is ranking them on like a gamer style tier list, all the way from S tier all the way down to D tier. Now what this doesn't mean is if there's D tier, it's a crap lens, it's a slow autofocus lens, or it's got rubbish image quality. What it basically means, in my opinion, I don't prefer shooting with it, or I personally wouldn't buy it with my own money. This is definitely more of an opinion-based video. If you are interested in maybe looking at a few dedicated reviews where we do look at sharpness or we do look at build quality, go ahead to the link in the description. I'll link every single review I've made from the list. But today we're just going to be kind of ranking them in a more informal video, just to show you guys what I personally think of all of these lenses that I have reviewed. So out of all of the Canon RF lenses I reviewed, these are the 12 that you can see on screen that I've actually reviewed on this channel. I hopefully will be reviewing a lot more in the future, but so far these are the ones that Canon have let me basically review and use. Some of them I've brought, but most of them were review units, which I have sent back. So let's start off with the very first one, which you can see here is the Canon RF 15 to 35mm. Now I was lucky enough to take this to Utah on my last trip to the USA, and I predominantly used it for landscape photography. And I must say, firstly, it was an amazing trip. If you love landscapes, Utah is an amazing place for landscapes. You've got 5 national parks all in one. I've actually visited quite a few national parks in the US, I think 15 in total, which I'm quite happy with, and hopefully a few more next year. But yeah, this was an amazing lens to use. Really liked the image quality, and I loved how it was an f2.8 and image stabilization. Now, I don't think it's just good for landscapes. I also think it's really good for portraits as well. Again, I used it at a couple weddings when I got the chance, and this really did blow me away. I'm definitely more of a prime shooter, but this is the one lens I think that really tempted me into shooting with zooms. I think just the versatile nature of from ultra wide to semi wide, I think is really handy. Again, coupling with the image stabilization, so it's great for video, as well as having that f2.8 aperture. The only real negative I could think of this lens is the price point. It is quite an expensive lens, but I've actually looked on a few websites and you can actually get it for around £1,700 now. If you look on MPB, I'll make sure to link basically the link in the description where you can buy it secondhand. You can actually get it for fairly reasonably priced nowadays. So that's one thing I would say is any of these lenses, they are expensive, but you definitely can get them secondhand now, as most of them are a little bit older. So if I went to go rank this lens, I'd definitely rank this S tier. I really think it's one of the best lenses that you could buy, especially if you're a landscape photographer or a wedding photographer. This is one of the go-to lenses. Now they do an F4 version, but I haven't reviewed it yet, so I haven't added it to the tier list. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is the 24 to 70 f2.8. Now, I've used this lens a lot, took it to Northern Ireland, took a few photos, took a few videos, and I've got to admit, I liked it, but I personally wouldn't buy it. And I would actually say that for all 24 to 70s. It's not a focal length I would use that often, unless it was the 28 to 70 f2, but that's because of the f2 aperture, nothing to do with the focal length. Again, it covers that 35 to 50 range, which is really handy for a wide range of photography. But me personally, I'd rather have a dedicated prime lens at 35mm or at 50mm. It's one of those focal lengths that is handy, but for me, I find other lenses perform better, and I'd personally buy those over a 24 to 70. Now again, this is more personal opinion. I know a lot of people love a 24 to 70, but for me personally, not a lens I would necessarily recommend if you're a photographer. Maybe if you're a filmmaker, that's a very handy focal length, but it's just never wide enough or never tight enough for me. I'd rather have a ultra wide angle zoom and an ultra wide angle prime than I would a medium telephoto. So yeah, because of that, I think it's a great lens, and it also offers image quality, but for me, I don't think I can rank it much higher than a B. A really good lens, but not the best in my opinion, especially when you compare it to other lenses that we're going to be looking at today. Okay, so the next lens is the 28 to 70mm f2. Now this lens here really was amazing. And out of all of these, I think this is a lens that probably I would say is the best RF lens currently available. Now obviously it's not for everybody, it is massive and it's also very expensive, but image quality wise and the size and weight, when you ignore that, the image quality personally I think is probably one of the best you can get for a zoom lens. It's got very little distortion and vignetting, and just when I used it, I just loved it. Every single photo I took, I went, wow, that is an awesome photo. And that lens just offers you that kind of spark that other lenses just don't offer you. Now again, like I was saying, it's not for everybody, but if I could rank any lens the highest, I would definitely rank the 28 to 70. So because of that, I'm going to be putting that alongside the 15 to 35mm. I'm going to be ranking that in S level tier. That is just love that lens. It's just, I wish Canon weren't asking so much money for it. Okay, so let's move on to the 70 to 200mm f2.8. Now this lens, again, really good lens, and I highly recommend it for anyone that's maybe interested in maybe starting out with wedding photography, or is actually interested in buying another lens maybe for landscape photography. It's also really good for wildlife as well. Now there's something special about a 70 to 200 2.8. You've got a real nice kind of very versatile focal range, and it's also really good for creating a nice shallow depth of field as well as this has got really good image stabilization. Now when I used it, I just fell in love with it, really liked it. And if I had to have two zooms, I'd have the 15 to 35mm as well as the 70 to 200mm. The only downside to this lens really I could see is how expensive it is, which is why I haven't upgraded yet. Currently, I own the EF 70 to 200mm Mark II, which is an older style lens, really good for image quality, but not as good as the RF. But the price difference just puts it out the ballpark for me. If I ever, maybe next year or the year after, needed to upgrade, this is one of the RF lenses I definitely would upgrade first. But at the moment, I'm pretty happy with my EF one. It's not a lens that I'm necessarily going to upgrade anytime soon because it's just reliable. It's good. And if you're a second shooter, actually a 70-200 is one of the ones I highly recommend. It's a good lens if you're not very confident in taking photos and you want to do portraiture work. You can be a lot further away and kind of take candid photos from long distance without necessarily being up in people's faces, which is what you'd need for a 35 or a 24mm at a wedding. So yeah, for all types of photography, I always recommend a 70-200. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be putting this solidly in A tier, not in S tier, because I still think other lenses are better. But yeah, this lens, when you include the price, I do think it's A level tier, definitely. Okay, next lens is the 70 to 200mm f4. Now this is, again, as good, I would say, as a 70 to 200mm. It's just got a stop less of brightness. So you're looking a lot smaller, a lot lighter, but you're not getting that extra stop. And in the 70 to 200mm, it is a little bit noticeable when you're looking at the compression, like the actual separation of foreground and background. But to most people, you probably wouldn't notice a difference. And this is the lens I'd recommend for any travel photographers out there, or if you're just interested in photography, but it's not your main job. So I think it's a really good lens, but I can't rank it any higher than the 70-200 2.8 because I love that lens. So I'm probably going to go for B tier. I'll probably rank it as well as the 24-70. I think they're as good as each other. I really liked it. The big benefit is how small and lightweight it is. But for that aperture, I always prefer that 2.8. I know it's bigger and I know it's more expensive, but for me personally, 2.8 aperture, you can't really ignore it. Okay, so let's move on to one of the newer lenses on the list, the 100 to 400mm f5.6 to f8. Now this is a wildlife photographer's dream lens, especially if you're an amateur wildlife photographer. Now this kind of replaces the EF 70 to 300mm, so you're getting a little bit of extra reach, but you're also getting a little bit darker aperture. Now the image quality from this lens is really good. What kind of lets it down, I would say, is the build quality aspect. And when using it, it does feel quite cheap in your hand, especially when you compare it to other lenses we've got on this list today. So if you're an amateur photographer that's after a small, lightweight, and very good quality lens, then the 100 to 400mm is really good. But if you're a professional, that build quality is just not going to last you. The weather sealing isn't very, very good, if any, I don't think. And also, I just felt it very cheap. Because it's so light, it just feels cheap. And it doesn't ruin the image quality, but it does ruin the use and the feel of that lens, especially when you couple it with an R5. I think this lens would be really good with an R10 or an R7. But for professional photography, it's professional quality images, but just not the overall quality when it comes to the overall lens. So I would probably rank that as solid B. I think it's not terrible, but it's not a lens I'd recommend to professionals. Amateurs though, definitely. Now, the next lens here is one that I would recommend to professionals, and that is the 100 to 500mm f4.5 to 7.1. Now, this lens replaced the 100 to 400mm, again, gives you a little bit of extra reach and a little bit of a darker aperture. But that extra reach really comes handy when you are using it for birds, for example. I filmed some dippers in West Burton Falls and that in Yorkshire, and that was an amazing lens for that. And also red squirrels as well, really good lens to zoom in. And with the extra kind of enhanced video mode you've got on the R5, you can get really close. And I absolutely love this lens for it. I actually think it's probably the best telephoto zoom lens currently on the market, kind of overall, when it comes to its image quality, when it comes to the overall size and weight, because it is quite a lightweight lens. But unlike the 100 to 400, it doesn't feel cheap. It feels real premium, and everything just felt well made. And then with the image quality as well, really, really nice. So yeah, I'm not sure, how would I rank this lens? I would probably go for A tier, I think. I don't think it's S tier, but I definitely think it's A tier, just because of that price point. It is very expensive. The image quality is great, but I only can really recommend it for wildlife photographers. I couldn't really recommend it to anyone else, to be honest with you. It's quite a specific, quite niche lens. Okay, so they're all the zooms. Let's have a look at the prime lenses. Let's have a look at one of the lenses I actually own, which is the RF 16mm f2.8. Now, this came out fairly recently. It's not the oldest lens on the RF market, but I've got to admit, it's a decent lens. The image quality could definitely be better. The distortion and vignetting is fairly bad close up, but it's a lens that's cheap, and it's good. It's not amazing, it's good. I actually think it was originally designed, really, I think, for it being on a APS-C body, so like an R7 or an R10. Because when you do take that in consideration, you're getting a 24mm f3.2 to f4 when you kind of do the kind of maths on it. It's a decent lens. I actually own it, really like it, but I wouldn't recommend it for image quality. The starbursts shooting at, let's say, f16 are not very good. I would say it's good for weddings, but I rarely use it, to be honest with you. It's a good lens. I don't know. It's fairly cheap, and the image quality could definitely be a little bit better. So I think I'm probably going to rank that C level. It's just 16mm so niche that I only could use it in some instances, and every time I do use it, I just like, the image, it's not as sharp as I wanted it to be, which is what really drew me towards that 15 to 35mm. You get better image quality and more versatile. The big thing that's really drawn me towards it, though, was the size and weight aspect. It's really, really small and lightweight. Right, so the next lens is the 35mm f1.8 macro. Now, this lens I really did like using. I love a 35mm focal length, and it being a macro lens makes it probably one of the best lenses you could buy for weddings. It's not got the fastest autofocus, but to be honest with you, for the price point, I actually think it's a really good starter lens. Now, what I think lets 35mm focal lengths down in Canon is this is the only lens you've got. There is no L series lens to compare it to, which is really disappointing. And if I could recommend it, I'd recommend like a 35-1.4 RF, but it doesn't currently exist. So this 1.8 is the one that we're going for. So because of that, I'm not going to rank it quite high, but if they ever did bring out another RF 35mm L series lens, this may go down lower on my list. But for what you get, image quality, and it's got that handy macro ability, I've got to rank it quite high, to be honest with you, and I was really happy with it. I personally don't own it because I own a Sigma 35mm f1.4 because that aperture just really helps, and that having that slightly faster autofocus. But yeah, that macro ability, if you are getting into wedding photography, probably recommend that really high. So I'm going to probably go for A tier on that one. I was really surprised by the image quality, I have to admit. Okay, so let's go for the 50mm f1.8, the very first RF lens I ever purchased. Now, it's got nothing against the lens, but I don't actually really like a 50mm focal length, to be honest with you. I started out with a 50mm. That's the very first lens I ever brought. I think it was an EF 50mm f1.8 STM for EF lenses for Canon. But I grew out of it quite quickly, to be honest with you. And it's got nothing against the lens. It's just me personally, I don't prefer a 50mm focal length. So I do bring this to every single wedding. And I don't think not this year, I don't think I've used it at a wedding. I just personally prefer a 35mm and an 85mm prime lens. 50mm is just in the middle, and it's a bit too tight in some instances and not wide enough in others. So it's in that middle ground where I don't use it. Personally, it's not a lens I would recommend, but it's a lens I think beginner photography should start off with. And it's a lens that I always say, if you're new to photography, always start with a 50mm. For the main reasons, they're usually quite cheap. But for me, I should rank it higher. I know I should rank it higher. But I'm probably going to rank this D. I'm probably going to get a lot of hate in the comments for this one. But I don't know. It's a lens that I think you should own, but not necessarily rely on. Now, a lens that I'd love to try out is the 50mm f1.2. That might change my mind on 50mm focal lengths because it offers that lovely f1.2 aperture. But to be honest with you, it's a really good lens. No, don't grant me, it's a really, really good lens, but I just don't use that focal length a lot. And because of that, I'm probably gonna rank that in D tier. Okay, so let's go for the Canon RF 85mm f2. Now, this is a lens I very, very recently reviewed, only I think last month, and I was really happy with it. I love an 85mm focal length. It offers that lovely compression. F2 offers that nice shallow depth of field, and also the big benefit, it is a macro lens. So if you are a wedding photographer, you could take a nice photo of, let's say, the bride, and then focus on the rings without swapping lenses. How amazing is that? That is really cool. As well as the image stabilization is really good. So for hybrid work, if you want to do a little bit of video and a little bit of photography, really good for that. And it's not that big either. It's a fairly small and lightweight lens. The only real thing that's not great is it's still, the actual autofocus is quite slow because it's an STM, it's not an L series lens, so it doesn't have any of those nano USM motors in it. It just can't keep up in some instances, but if you place it in manual focus and do some really cool shots, you can get some amazing images from this lens. And because of that, I'm actually going to rank it, I'm not going to rank it super high because the autofocus is just so slow. So I'm probably going to rank it B level. But if you are interested in, let's say, getting into wedding photography and you don't currently have a really good 85mm, this RF1 is a great one to start off with. Okay, and the last one on my list today is the Canon RF 100mm f2.8L, a macro. Now, this lens was really, really good. Loved it. But I personally I wouldn't say never buy it, but I wouldn't currently buy it. And for the main reason is the EF 100mm is just as good, in my opinion. The image quality is really, really good in both instances. The big benefit, or the two big benefits of shooting the 100mm, the first one is that 1.4 times magnification instead of just 1 times, as well as it has that SA control ring. Now, the SA control ring stands for spherical aberration control. And basically, you can change the type of bokeh. I personally never used it. I showed you off in the review, but it's not something I'd ever review. You can basically change the sharpness of the bokeh. I personally never used it when I was at a wedding, never used it for that. And also, I'd never really used that extra 40% increase in resolution when it comes to the size. So you can blow up things 1.4 times versus 1 times, which is a 40% increase. So I've got the EF one, and I'm always going to stick to that. Unless it breaks or I get an absolute banging deal on the 100mm, I'm just not going to upgrade to it. Now, if you're brand new to RF and you want a macro lens, then go for it. 100% recommend it all the way to the sun. But this lens, for me personally, I can't rank it very high because the EF one is so good. Like, why would I upgrade a lens that's just as good and I'm not going to use any of the new features? If you were going to use it, if you're dedicated macro, then definitely. But for me, I just can't rank it much higher. So I'm going to rank it in C. So yeah, so that is my ranking tier list, all the way from the two lenses I love to own both of these, 15-35 and 28-70, all the way down to the 50mm 1.8. I do think you should own this lens. I know I am ranking it D. I do think you should own it, but I don't think, for professionals, I just don't think it's reliable. I think the autofocus is just not fast enough. And I personally prefer a 35 and an 85 focal length. So yeah, so that's my list. Write it down in the comments below if you agree or disagree. I'm sure I'm gonna get some hate for that 50mm, but yeah, that is my ranking tier list, YouTube tier list for all of the Canon RF lenses I've reviewed on this channel. And of course, if you'd like to watch any dedicated review, I'll make sure to place all of the videos in the link in the description. Brilliant. And there we go, guys. So that is my gamer style YouTube tier list on all of the Canon RF lenses I have reviewed on this channel. And if I had to give a winner, I'd probably give it to the Canon RF 28-70. I probably think that is by far my favorite lens I have reviewed on this channel. I loved it. I loved how it was amazing image quality, and I just loved how versatile that focal range was. For weddings or even portrait work, this is the lens to buy. The major downside to it, obviously, is it is horrendously expensive, which is why it is currently not in my camera bag, but hopefully not for much longer, so I might be buying it next year. All depends on if I can afford it, basically. But yeah, that's the one that I think that would win this. And of course, if you are interested in me to add to this tier list, maybe do an EF one or a Sigma one or even a Tamron one, make sure to write it down in the comments below and I'll get round to making that video. I've been James for Photo Fever and I'll catch you guys next time.